So it's really a shock to a lot of people who don't know him and don't know his staff that as last night, well, last afternoon, Friday, on the 10th, at about 3 o'clock, they put out an announcement that they had fired one of their aides, and that is Mr. John Stemmen, who's 57 years old, has been working for Anthony Brindisi for about 9 years now, and 8 years now. Let me correct that, 8 years now. He started working with him back when Anthony was in the New York State Assembly and in the communications department. And it seems that John decided to go onto the internet and try to set up a, quote, sex date, or in other words, hire a prostitute who happened to be 17 years old. This is a big deal. This is a very big deal. And on screen right now, I have the New York Post article, which is Aide to Upstate Congressman Busted for Patronizing 17-Year-Old Prostitute. Now, one of the early things that I had mentioned about it when I first heard about this story, I mentioned, and I was talking about it as a person, my personal comment, that this is, they have a pedophile in their office. Let me correct that, and a lot of people may not know this. In New York State, it is legal for a minor, someone who is not legally able to vote, a non-legal adult, someone who's under the age of 18, actually 17, to be able to consent to sex, which is really weird to me. Someone who is not able to go out and buy cigarettes, not able to join the military, well, I think you can join the military, but someone who's not a legal adult does have the legal right to have sex with an adult 40 years older than them. That just blows my mind away. It really does. But the whole thing blows my mind away. And I have to say, as I have done for others, shame, Game of Thrones shame to both Rep. Anthony Brindisi and to his staffer, John Stemmen, about this. Because this is just insane. I can't help but wonder that someone is working in the office with Anthony Brindisi, one of his key staff personnel who's worked with him in the New York Assembly, that's been working with him in the Congress of the United States, representing the New York 22nd District, and over 8 years with him, no one has ever noticed. This doesn't seem like something that you would do out the blue. 57-year-olds don't necessarily start new ideas, suddenly wake up one morning and go, hey, let me get a prostitute because I've never done that before in my life. Let me go and try and find a 17-year-old because I'm 57. It's a pattern often found with many pedophiles. And I'm not saying that John Stemmen is a pedophile. I'm not saying that. But I am saying it's questionable. And his activity is questionable. And we know that right now, the police are investigating, and hopefully they're going to be looking through. This was found out because the woman in question, the 17-year-old, who's getting counseling as we speak, was arrested by the police on other charges, and she volunteered and let the police know about various apps on her phone that connected her to Mr. Stemmen, and Mr. Stemmen then, obviously, his connection to the Brindisi campaign became known. So it's a sordid tale, and there are a lot of questions. And I have to ask the question, which I'm not seeing in a lot of other media, that really needs to be asked, because it would be asked of a Republican, it would be asked of a conservative, a libertarian, anyone who isn't a Democrat. The very first thing that you would see in the news is, how long has this been going on? This person's been working for you for 8 years. How long has this been going on? Did anyone know about this? And did anyone cover this up? These are critical questions. And I ask these questions most importantly because this affects what's going on in Congress. Nobody in Congress wants to be connected to a sex scandal, even if it's with their staffers. Nobody wants to be connected to that. And no member of Congress wants to support a bill or co-sponsor a bill where that representative has a sex scandal attached to them. And that's bad for constituents. It means that federal funding is going to be hard to get. And if you look at the southern tier, if you look at the New York 22nd District in central New York, federal funding is a key cornerstone to the economy and keeping everything vital and moving, because it's not help. We're not getting help from Governor Cuomo, who's increasing taxes and driving out 1.5 million people from the state. That's not giving us help. We need the federal help. And anything that impedes that is a problem. And a question of a sex abuse scandal where the questions of how long has this been happening, did anyone know about that, and did anyone cover this up in any way, shape, or form, these are critical questions. New York State politics is rampant and known for its corruption. How many politicians, we're talking about Sheldon Silvers, we're talking about just a host of people, even recently, that have been removed from offices. And the benefit of doubt is hard to give when we know that New York politics allows, so many of our politicians to get away with things that they shouldn't get away with. And that's why we have so many representatives, whether it's on the state level or the national level, that get kicked out of office. Remember Anthony Weiner? That was a scandal. And they were trying to keep him protected before he got forced out, and because of his repeated actions. So yeah, it's a big deal. And we need to get answers to this. I think it's a very fair thing to say, hey, Representative Brindisi, we need to know if this has ever happened before. We need to know if anyone covered up for him. That who knew about this? When did they know? And then there's the added news that, and I believe it's coming out as well, that this gentleman was fired before charges actually happened, before the police actually took action. The office of Anthony Brindisi notified Mr. Stammen that there was going to be a charge placed against him, and they fired him, which is a problem. You're telling a potential criminal, someone who's pending arrest, and you're forewarning them about legal action happening against them, law enforcement acting against them. That's a problem too. Who leaked it? Who leaked the information? Who told the Brindisi office about this so that they fired Stammen before he even got arrested? Where did that all come from? How did they find this out? There's a problem here. And that kind of thing makes me go back to saying, wait a minute, if they're getting a notice ahead of time, if it is correct, if the information I've heard is correct, and I'm not saying it is, I could be completely wrong on this, I don't know. It's not like Brindisi's office will talk to me. He's been promising to do an interview with me for 3 years. He still hasn't done it. They're not talking to. And they're trying to be very quiet about this. They're trying to bury this story. They don't want people to know about it because they're worried about the 2020 election. I'm not worried about the 2020 election. I'm worried about the effectiveness of a member of Congress in being able to do his job, which even without this has not been stellar by any standard when you have no support on every bill that you put out. So it's already a problem. And now we're adding a scandal on top of it, which makes it even worse. And then we're adding in that there are leaks that are coming to this organization from somewhere, apparently, that may be interfering with the actions of law enforcement doing their job. That's a problem. There's questions here. There are a lot of questions here. And this story should not just go dead. This is not something that should just fall off and be buried. They put it out on Friday and late in the afternoon to bury this story. They were trying to hide this story. And because a lot of people have been paying attention to New York 22nd, because it's going to be one of the top 10 races in 2020, they couldn't. And they shouldn't. For the good of constituents, we need to get the answers to this, understand where these leaks are coming from, why people were interfering with the legal process, We need to know whether or not this has happened before and who knew about it and when they knew about it and if they covered this up. Get this resolved and allow our ability to be represented in Congress to be unimpeded, if that is possible. And if it is not, and others are involved in this, if this has been a long-term thing, then we need to make sure that everyone who is connected and is responsible for aiding and abetting such a crime gets prosecuted properly. That's the important thing. And, again, this is not a scripted show. This is me talking with you about it. And I know there are some people who are Democrats and they're like, oh, you're just picking on. It's not because he's a Democrat. I'd say this about a Republican. I have said it about Republicans. I pick on Republicans too. This is a problem. This is a problem for constituents, period. And we need to be aware of that. And I really think that, shame on the Brindisi campaign, his staff, on Mr. Brindisi himself, for not being aware of this, not noticing this, not finding out about this sooner in the years that they've had the opportunity. That's my personal point of view. But with that said, I'm going to stop. We're going to jump off. We're going to get in touch with our friend, Dr. Giovanni Scaringi, and talk about. I do want to also mention, and I thank Tina for some of her comments, when I was talking about Assemblyman Anthony Brindisi. And Assembly Anthony Brindisi, as I had mentioned, his aide had been arrested, and there's a lot of questions that are brought up in there. But I want to also include the thoughts that Tina brought up, because she says, first, she mentioned that she can't agree with me about Anthony Brindisi, shame on him, and he should be aware. She goes on to say that so many people live secret lives, and no person can be responsible for the actions of others and not knowing if they've kept it hidden. And you're right. And to be fair, it isn't something, obviously, if he's been doing this, if this is something that's been a repeat, or even if it's the first time, it's not necessarily something that Anthony Brindisi would know about or any of his other members of staff. Although we tend, when you work with someone for 8 years, my position is that if you worked with someone for 8 years, you tend to know things about that person. Maybe no one knew about it. But I don't give the benefit of doubt to any politician, whether they're a Republican, conservative, libertarian, Democrat, progressive, it doesn't matter. Because they're members of their elected officials, I hold them to a higher standard. And the presumption is, prove to me that this is not something that's been hidden, especially in New York State. In New York State, we have far too many politicians who have consistently gone out there and abused their power, abused their position, and hidden it from the public, have made public denials of committing crimes like Sheldon Silvers, as an example, or Dean Skelos, as another example, where they've said, oh, no, I'm not abusing my power, but then we find out, yes, they have, and people knew about it for decades and did nothing about it. We have a governor at the moment who is completely surrounded by people that he's called as close to him as his own brother, and yet they've committed all these acts of corruption, and he has no idea about it. It's hard to believe. So in that vein and under that understanding that New York is incredibly corrupt, and we see often that, politicians have someone fall on their sword, that they deflect, and they try and hide from these things that we later find out they knew all about. So yeah, I take the position, and maybe it's wrong, that someone probably knew. In politics, where it's such a insidious and closely watched industry, where people know about what everyone does and watches everyone all the time. I have people who watch me on a regular basis when I'm out and about just living my life. I know other people do it to other politicians. We know that, especially during campaign seasons, that campaigns hire people to follow candidates and their staff 24/7. We have Maxine Waters encouraging people to verbally attack politicians and staff members, and individuals in the administration that have nothing to do with policy and tracking them down in their regular lives just because they eat at a restaurant that may have Mexican food, and they attack them because of immigration policy. I mean, this is the nature of where we are. So yeah, I'm not necessarily forgiving. Blame me for that. Blame me for that. But Tina also goes on that she did agree that if it comes out that Anthony Brindisi knew or his staff knew about this, that it was hidden or that it was ignored, that he has done this more than once, John Stemmen has done this more than once, then that is a problem, and that the fault would lie with Mr. Brindisi and his staff or his staff, and that should be found out. She goes on to say, by the way, okay, and that's when she mentioned the mic. Okay, so let me give that caveat. And again, I'm not saying that this was absolutely a factual, that they knew. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that, in my opinion, given the nature of New York politics and the amount of time, if they didn't know, they probably should have. But, you know, then again, people have private lives that they keep very secret. I admit that. Maybe I'm overreactive. Well, then again, I'm a political pundit. It's the nature of the job that sometimes we're overreactive. And this is a personal view. I'm not saying that, well, it is somewhat of a professional view as well, that these questions are questions. They have to be answered. And the reason for that is we need to remove this. Whether you like Anthony Brindisi or not, this scandal has to be answered and cleared and gone. Otherwise, the effectiveness of Congress and bills that get passed, whether you like them or not, that he's trying to put through, which, you know, his bill on veteran suicides, anything that prevents veteran suicides, I support. It can't get done when there's a sex scandal that's in question there. And I guarantee you in 2020, this is going to come back up. This is a question. It's a character question. And it's going to come up. And no one wants to be attached to that. No one in politics wants to be attached to a sex scandal. It doesn't help anyone. So this is why I say that. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's perfectly fine. Call me out. Mr. Brindisi, Anthony, if you disagree, call me out. You can tell me you think I'm wrong or that I've gone too far. You think I'm overreacting. That's perfectly fine. Tina did. Others will, and that's okay. But this is the way I see it, and I just want to share that with you. But that's how we have this conversation. But I think when we come down to the questions I've asked, I think everyone reasonably would be able to say, yeah, those are questions that need to be answered. They need to be clear for the public, for the constituents. This is in the best interest of everyone to have answers and not avoid that.